Today I'm covering the Tongsheng TSDZ2 mid-drive torque sensing e-bike conversion kit on a mountain bike. And it's not really a mountain bike anymore, and I'll get into that later, but for now it's a nice greenway bike, really nice for paved trails like this. Slight off-road maybe, but for the most part the mountain biking days for this one are over. I'll get into the downside right off the bat. Taking a mountain bike that used to be a good hardtail and putting this much weight on it with the battery in the mid-drive kit made it not very nice riding hardtail. This used to be a good bike to do cross-country races on, be competitive in those, and now it just slams the ground. Every single bump is just brutal. So hitting a trail at speed with any kind of ruts or roots or rocks, basically any normal mountain bike trail that isn't practically paved, is just so unpleasant. I can't see using it for that. Now I'll go over the bike a little bit. Here's detail of the battery, which is I think a 17.5 amp hour, something like that. Pretty standard older school 9-speed drivetrain. The front triple ring was replaced with the single ring that comes with the Tongsheng kit. The display is the 860C display. Again, typically you'd see that with a Bafang, but the open source allows you to use different displays, and it also gives you the ability to program your settings directly through the open source menu. On the other side of the bike, we've got the wiring harness, which admittedly isn't real neat right now, but I've had to take it on and off 3 times, so haven't really taken the time to tidy that back up. There's more wiring down there. I found that a good use of an old chainstay protector was to cut it in half and use the 2 halves to velcro together and cover up all the wiring. And then that's the standard TSDZ Tongsheng motor. Did add a kickstand. I mean, if you're gonna ride greenways, you may as well have a kickstand so you can leave your bike. And that's the suspension seat post, old Cane Creek Thud Buster. Just for grins, we'll do a little single track on this thing. It is a mountain bike channel after all. Whoa, okay, that's sketchy. These front tires are not gonna grip, so nice little berm helps them stay in it. Yeah, everything's gonna rattle, including my teeth and my spine. Ow. Not cool. Here's a section of trail that's actually pretty smooth. The start's a little bumpy, and granted, I do have greenway tires on there, which make the ride a little harsher, but it's so bad with even mountain bike tires on it, it doesn't matter. You might think, oh, that's not so bad, but and I think the GoPro's smoothing this out probably more than what it feels like. And I tried doing this for 2 or 3 rides the first time I put a motor on it, and it shook just about everything on the bike loose instantly. Like half a ride in, 3 of the chain ring bolts were missing, which, by the way, when you do the install on these, make sure to pre-tighten the chain ring bolts because they probably shipped loose. But yeah, all this weight slams every little bump, every root. It just, ugh. I ended up putting greenway tires on this thing instead of mountain bike tires because they're a lot quieter. They roll better. And it turns out that translates into about 15% better battery life. So this hill goes through some switchbacks. It's pretty steep. By the time you get up to it riding a regular bike, pretty gassed, breathing hard at least. And this thing has plenty of power. Can change the display. Right now it's showing the battery current, motor power, assist level, speed. Can switch it over to show the human power, motor power, odometer, and you can show some more speed stats and trip distance. Main reason for making this video is to talk about what happens after you install the open source firmware on the Tongsheng kit. And there's plenty of videos on how to install the kit and how to install the firmware. But what I haven't seen is that the chance of overdriving the motor with the open source firmware is on the table, and a very real possibility with the default settings. And I've got 3 motors that I've gone through to prove that. Basically, with the open source firmware, you can run whatever battery up to, I think, 52 volts, which is what I have. And you can run that at various amperages. And if you do the voltage times amps to come up with watts, it doesn't take you long to figure out that, oh, a motor that's really intended for, I think, about 400 to 450 watts max can overheat rather quickly with a 52 volt battery running at even 10 amps, which is going to give you probably close to 600 watts if you're pedaling it hard and making the torque sensor really kick in and go. One of the nice things about the kit with the open source firmware is that you can set this up to be a class 1, class 2, or a class 3 e-bike just by going through the menu and setting things up in the software. There's some myths about e-bikes in general, like, oh, you're gonna go so crazy fast if you have a throttle. Well, the reality is that your gearing dictates your speed more than the motor capability, because this will top out down the biggest hill I could find out in the country at about 38 miles an hour. And for comparison, on my road bikes with no motor, if I get a good rolling start into the same hill, basically ride the hill the same way on a road bike with a big 52 or 53 tooth front sprocket and 11 in the back instead of like a 46 or something on the front and 11 in the back, I can easily clear 40 down that same hill and actually be pushing 50 miles an hour if there's no headwind. So you're really not going faster. And then the other reality of e-bikes is if you do hot rod around on them like that, your battery's going to be done so fast that it's going to be a short ride. One of the other big myths is that, oh, you're going to hit your throttle and take off like a rocket. Well, here's full throttle. It's pretty underwhelming. it's actually pretty good, but it's not going to spin the tires or make you do a wheelie or anything crazy. It's just, you can actually pedal way harder with a slight amount of effort. So, and again, if you're relying on throttle on your e-bike, you're going to go through batteries so fast. The open source does give you the option to run this in cadence sensing or torque sensing or some kind of weird hybrid version that I haven't figured out yet, but I've tried it. It feels like torque sensing to me, so I don't really see what it's doing different. Maybe a little ghost pedaling can be done in that, it seems like, but for the most part it's torque sensing or cadence sensing, which I really prefer the torque sensing. It's got a pretty natural feel to it. There's 9 levels of assist that the open source offers, and for everything but really big hills going up, obviously it doesn't do you any good down. The open source firmware combined with this Tongsheng really seems powerful enough to mostly ride around on level 2 out of 9, and that's a good natural feel. The motor is actually pretty quiet. You'll know you've cooked one like I have with 3 of them. It'll get a lot noisier than this. It'll actually turn into almost like a old-time fire engine crank siren, where the faster you go, the more it winds up. I'll probably include a little video clip I made of one of them that had gone bad before I changed it out. Mileage may vary, but I can't say I'd recommend putting a mid-drive e-bike conversion kit on a hardtail, and based on that I can't say I'd recommend getting a hardtail e-bike in general for mountain biking, because it's just so much unsuspended weight that it just is gonna shake your teeth out. And if you're okay with that, just go into it knowing that's the case. But wow, it was really unpleasant, and like I said earlier, it shook a bunch of bolts loose that had never come loose on this bike before. And it was a good bike. I raced on it. Used to do marathon cross-country races on this bike, and it was fine. It was a very competitive bike. If you had a donor bike that was full suspension mountain bike, I could see this kit possibly working on that if the frame would accommodate the battery and the bottom bracket was a design where you could get away with tilting the motor up more so it had more ground clearance, because that does bang some rocks if it's hanging down too low or too much straight down, like most frames would probably force you to mount it. If I was buying the mid-drive Tongsheng kit all over again, I would just get the standard kit. I don't know that the open source really adds that much to it. I mean, it's cool to be able to set the parameters and use a different display and all that, but when it comes down to actually just riding it on a greenway, which is what this is obviously intended for, I think it'd be fine just out of the box and use the right battery for it. If it's a 36 volt kit, use a 36 volt battery. If it's a 48 volt, use a 48. And I think they have a new TSDZ2, which uses 52 volt. So, you know, use the right battery for the right kit. Little Mississippi River action here, looking at the JB Bridge going across from Missouri into Illinois. Across the river to the Illinois side, and then down the river